The Federal Capital Territory FCT Nigeria comprises 6 area councils and covers an area of 8,000 square meters. The FCT is projected to have an average population of about 270,000 children with different forms of disabilities, out of which only an average of 10,000 are currently receiving some form of basic education in the 3 government-owned and the other 4 privately owned special needs schools across the area councils. Almost an invisible figure of the total aggregate of the children living with disabilities in the FCT also study in inclusive units of public, private primary and secondary schools in the Federal Capital Territory. Access to basic and post-basic education for children living with disabilities have continued to be confronted by several challenges, such as funding and unavailability of adequate learning facilities, amongst many others. The Federal Capital Territory Administration in its submitted 2022 appropriation reflected no budgetary plans for education development in the 6 area councils of the FCT, as displayed on its official domain. While another document titled FCT 2023 Statutory Appropriation revealed the sum of 153 million to be spent on the construction of additional and classroom seats for the year 2022 and the sum of 53 million naira for the outgone year of 2023. AD4 TV Radio, in its attempts to reconcile FCT appropriation plans with realities in some basic schools in the FCT, our camera-less discovered that none of the items on the document is in tandem with the requisite needs of inclusive education. This is better narrated in the story of Ajara Ibrahim, an indigene of the Federal Capital Territory. She told her story on the difficulties faced in accessing basic education in the FCT. She also said that the lack of support ended her dreams of supporting her community in the provision of medical health care. Ajara Ado ended up working in a hospital as a card attendant, but not as a nurse, as aspired.
On the part of funding, is a very big task. It is our families that take our responsibility in financial issues. The government doesn't do that. The government doesn't pay our school fees. We pay our school fees and we continue to struggle. Even those that are in the university will continue to struggle. If our families continue to struggle, we make sure that our fees and everything that we need are taken care of financially.
Using my money.
Just like Ajara, the education of many pupils and students living with disabilities in the FCT schools may be threatened as a result of their non-inclusiveness in gaining access to quality education. This edition of Leaves and Worms focuses on equitable learning experiences for children living with disabilities attending mainstream schools in the Federal Capital Territory. The inclusive education policy stated that parties to the policy should ensure the right of all pupils to education, to provide equal and equitable opportunities for all categories of pupils and students with complex learning profiles in preschools, primary schools, and secondary, as well as higher institutions.
When it comes to inclusive education, like I said earlier on, also could be rated, or I should say 40 to 60, 40 over 100, because what they have been practicing in the past is special needs education. But what we stand to promote today is an inclusive education, because when you're referring to special need, every one human being living on earth has a need. Is not particular for persons with disabilities alone that have needs. So The right terminology to adopt is inclusive education, which promotes a conducive learning environment for children with disabilities. It also encourages acceptance in the society, reducing barrier and stereotyping for students with disability by their contemporaries without disability. This inclusive education is a kind of a systemic education that gives an opportunity for a person's or children with disability to have a broader understanding of knowledge, as such having an independent, preparing them for an independent living, because their own kind of education is such that it entails some practical skill, employability skills. This will also give them opportunities for employment, and also broadens their understanding and knowledge of education, as such in future promotes an independent living.
sonye anyị n'ileba anya na ọtụtụ mpụ na nrụrụ aka jupụtara na ụlọ akwụkwọ gọọmenti ndị nọ n'isi obodo Naijiria bụ Abuja, tụmadụ ka o si metụta mmụta na agụmakwụkwọ n'ogo dịgasị iche iche n'ebe ụmụntakịrị nwoke na nwaanyị nọ, ndị ntorobịa, ụmụ nwaanyị tinyekwara ndị nwere nkwarụ. Sonye ihe emereme Leaves and Worms na AD4 TV radio, ebe a na-eleba anya ma na-atụgharị atụmatụ gọọmenti dịgasị iche iche ka o siri metụta isiokwu a ka akpụ n'ọnụ. Na-esonyere anyị n'ihe emereme akwa izu ụka ọbụla n'akara mgbasa ozi anyị niile. Ọ bụ AD4 TV radio na njikọ aka Wole Nshoyinka Center for Investigative Journalism tinyekwara MacArthur Foundation kwadoro ma hụ maka nke a.
This is expected to promote the full development of all their abilities and potential. The policy has, however, seen little or no implementation 9 years after its approval by the National Council on Education.
Of course, the challenges are enormous. Like we have different laws and acts that speaks to inclusive education. The likes of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the Prohibition Act, the Discrimination Against Persons with Disability Prohibition Act, the Child's Right Act. The Constitution of Nigeria says that every child has right to free and basic education. A step further would have been implementation of these policies that have mentioned to promote inclusive education by enhancing learning for children with disability, as such giving them equal learning opportunities like their contemporaries or the students without disability, as such giving them sense of belonging and promoting participation in the societal functions. So in FCT, inclusive education can only see the light of day if implementation of those policies I've mentioned is duly carried out and encouraged in FCT. Most schools in FCTs, even the special needs schools, are not accessible. When it comes to the structure of the schools, I'm a physically challenged persons. Of course, schools that have gigantic staircases are not for me. Neither is it for wheelchair users, neither is it for the blind. Then when it comes to the deaf, of course, there are no sign language, there are no presence of sign language interpreters in our conventional schools. So as such, if we are clamoring for an inclusive education in FCT, number one, there has to be a deliberate and intentional implementation of the policies that promotes inclusive education, like the Discrimination Against Persons with Disability Prohibition Act, the Child's Right Act, the Constitution of Nigeria, the United Nations Convention on the Right of Persons with Disability, which Nigeria is a signatory to, has also made a commitment to promote inclusive education in Nigeria.
You know that in education, we have the primary education, we have the secondary, and we have the tertiary. The only place where you have the school for the blind is in the primary stroke secondary education. And even in the secondary education, there are schools that are inclusive, and that is what we preach. Those schools, they mainstream both blind and those that are not blind. But in the university, there are no special schools. And so like in Abuja here, we have Jabi School for the Blind. Is a special school for the blind people. And it's a primary school where people go from primary 1 to 6. And when they go out of that very place, they go to the secondary. One of the schools that accommodate all blind persons in Abuja here is Kwali School for the Blind. So they accommodate a lot of our people in that very place. And so for the School for the Blind, Jabi here, yes, they have all it takes to train up persons that are blind. But in the secondary, well, the School for the Blind in Kwali, they are trying. At least they have some of the necessary requirements to train up the blind persons. But in the university, you have to cater for yourself. You have to buy your computer, you have to buy your braille machines, you have to get your recorders, and even to look for people that can assist you in reading or recording your books. So the primary here is okay. The secondary, they are coming up small, and then the university in Nigeria is what I don't know what they're doing. We use white cane, which we celebrate on every October 15th to move or navigate our ways. And the white cane, with the white cane, you can find out the places you have obstacles and deviate from those places. And so the mobility is something that not all of us are very good in it, but we are still trying our best.
No, I don't think so. We have been around schools within the FCT, and from the evidence on the ground, you can see that the educational structures are not inclusive enough. They're not inclusive enough in the sense that when you look at access, many of these schools do not have the basic requirements that will help children with disability to even have access to the environment. And also, beyond just the environment, when you look at the content, what is the content of the education? Does it cater enough for the diversity of the various forms of disabilities we have? For example, you talk about visually impaired people, you talk about the people with physical challenges, you even talk about the people with mental health related challenges. So has the educational system in the FCT been able to evolve in a way that caters for the needs of all of these? Yes, we have a few schools focused on people with disability here and there, but they are so far flung and far in between that even access to such schools become a real big challenge for the physical challenge. So on that note, I don't think we have a system that falls in line with the best practices across the globe, because you're talking about the FCT here, the Federal Capital of Nigeria. So if you have these challenges becoming so replete in the FCT, what more would you say about parts of the country that are less resourced, unlike the FCT, which has a lot more resources by virtue of the fact that it's the nation's capital?
Ẹ darapọ̀ mọ́ wa lórí ètò Leaves and Worms lórí ẹ̀rọ rédíò AD for TV radio bí a ó ṣe máa fojú lámẹ̀yìntàn wo àwọn ìwà ìbàjẹ́ lórí ètò ẹ̀kọ́ ní gbogbo ẹ̀ka ètò ẹ̀kọ́ ní àwọn ilé ìwé ìjọba tó wà nílùú Àbújá tí ń ṣe olú ìlú orílẹ̀-èdè Nàìjíríà, àti ipa irúfẹ́ ìwà ìbàjẹ́ náà máa ń kó lórí àwọn ọ̀dọ́mọdébìnrin, ọ̀dọ́mọdékùnrin, àwọn àkàndá ènìyàn, àwọn obìnrin àti ọ̀dọ́ lápapọ̀. Bákan náà lórí ètò yìí a ó tún máa ṣàgbéyẹ̀wò nípa àwọn ètò ìlànà ìjọba tó ṣe pàtàkì àti ipa tí wọ́n ń kó lórí àwọn olùgbé ìlú Àbújá. Ẹ fojú sọ́nà bí a ó ṣe máa jẹ̀gbádùn ètò alárinrin yìí lọ́sọ̀ọ̀sẹ̀. Ilé-iṣẹ́ AD for TV radio pẹ̀lú àjọṣepọ̀ ẹ̀ka ilé-iṣẹ́ Wọlé Ṣóyínká lórí ètò ìròyìn ìwádìí ló ṣe àtọ́kùn ètò yìí pẹ̀lú ìrànlọ́wọ́ àjọ MacArthur Foundation.
In this interview with Plan International Education specialist Laban Onisimos, AD4 TV seeks to know how inclusive education is in the Federal Capital Territory.
Number one challenge has to do with the issue of understanding what is inclusive education, and also the need for those that are leading in it to actually say this is exactly what we want to do. Once we have these two things, then the issue of funding, the funding will definitely come out.
Between implementing inclusive education and providing special education for children living with disability in the FCT.
Yes, we have the policy, but it's not been translated into realities of what inclusive education means. Then two, the issue of leadership. Who is leading this process? Who is leading this process? I know that maybe in the FCT UBEC, you could have a department that is responsible for inclusive education or for special education. Yeah. So do they have enough funding to ensure that schools that are termed as special education are really inclusive? Yeah. What is the quality control that we have in ensuring that learning is actually taking place there? Now, one issue also has to do with the issue of how will a child that has a learning disability access a school term as a special school? Yeah, because if the school is located, let's say in Buari, and the child is staying in, let's say Amak, how will that child have access to that school? So,
Onisimos pointed lack of synergy between policymakers and the community of people living with disability in the FCT in the implementation of inclusive education as specified in the National Policy on Education.
If you take the higher percentage of those we consider that are out of school in the country, those that have learning challenges are very few. So you cannot really link it to the issue of inclusive education. Yes, if you pick the policy document for inclusive education, it's world-class standard. Yes. But you know, in the country, we have this issue of, yes, having policies that are in place, but the issue of implementation. Yeah. So for me, I believe
stakeholders now advocate for rehabilitation and proper equipping of existing public mainstream primary and secondary schools in the FCT to serve as pilot and demonstration of inclusive basic education in the nation's capital.
That are designated to be inclusive. Yeah, because of a truth, you can out of, let's say in the FCT we are having 250 primary school or basic education schools. You know, it's practically impossible for all the schools to be termed as inclusive education. But that is the desire. Yeah, because by the time you have all the 250 schools in the FCT, for example, are termed as inclusive, then it means that all children, irrespective of their learning deficiencies, can attend those schools, and that creates more access to them.
The Plan International chief said awareness on issues of inclusive education in the FCT is not enough, hence the need to enhance sensitization on the policy.
I believe this has to be a continuous sensitization, continuous advocacy here, and I want to throw this to the recently I think there is a commission responsible for people with disability. Yeah, so this could be a challenge to you to say, can we go on a continuous advocacy and sensitization as it relates to having children with one form of a disability going. Yeah, to have access. So let it not be on just special days and commemoration. We will emphasize that.
Towards implementing inclusive education, he pointed out necessary priority and cost-effective ways to reduce the population of children with disabilities who are out of school.
This has to do with the issue of education managers actually planning for that. Now, you see in the olden days when you have leprosy, they take you outside the major town and build your hospital there. So that mindset is still there. Those that probably design to say, okay, or make decisions to say, can we have this special school here, are still having that mindset of, okay, if it is a special school, then we need to take it maybe far away from where the citizens are and place it. So we need to change that entirely. And it is only when we agree that when it comes to the issue of inclusive education, I'm still going back to my points, to say all learners must be in the same place, then we will keep having special schools built far away from the learners.
The Executive Director, Teenage Network, Olanike Timipa Uge, speaks on the practice of inclusive education in Abuja.
Inclusive education, it simply means providing a learning environment where everyone, regardless of their gender, disability status or social status, are able to access quality learning. That is an environment that is devoid from all form of barriers, all form of learning barriers that an individual could face, on the basis of being in the minority group. So for the FCT, the first question is, who are the minority groups, that we usually have? And in the context of the FCT, the minority groups, refers to people living with disability. It refers to the female gender. Now, when you go to our classrooms, you realize that there's a physical barrier that are already in place in almost all of the schools in the FCT. Students that have physical impairments such as inability to walk properly, those on wheelchairs, those who are unable to see properly, those who cannot hear, they are excluded from learning, effectively. We don't have ramps in our schools. We don't have sign language interpreters in our schools. We don't have braille papers in our schools. Now the question is, or the excuse a lot of people will come up with, we have school for the deaf, we have schools for those with visual impairment. But that is not what inclusive education means. Inclusive education means being able to have all of this group of people, within the same classroom with other children that do not have, any form of disability, and they are still able, to learn. That is what inclusive education is. So until we are able to achieve that, we do not have inclusive education.
Challenges are the inaccessible materials, and what makes the materials to be inaccessible is the expensive nature of such materials. I can give you an example, if you permit me. Braille computer, a computer for the blind in Braille. It's running into like £4,195 in the UK, which here, if it were to be converted here, it would amount to 2.5 million or 3 million. So it is not easy for each and every person with visual impairment to have a specific computer costing 2.5 million or 3 million, and to be able to use it as effectively as possible. That's one of the challenges. And the other challenges is that, the other challenge I can say is that many people do find education for persons with visual impairments to be lackadaisical. That's uninteresting. They find it lackadaisical in the sense that they will think, this person is blind. Why should we have to spend such and such amount of money for him or for her to study, when there are thousands of sighted people who could benefit from such empowerment to be provided to them? So the lackadaisical attitude demonstrated to persons with visual impairments is one other challenge that we persons with visual impairments do face. If those should be addressed, I believe the sky will be the limit in the ability for persons with visual impairments to study alongside their able-bodied ones in all tertiary institutions as well as secondary or primary.
That is also an issue that any government administrator would also have to come to terms with, because people with disabilities are still stigmatized. They're still viewed as lesser people. When a culture is there that stops people from accessing the system, it's still the duty of the government to say, how do we work with relevant actors to ensure that the culture changes. A lot of work needs to be done by those in the governance sector, but we also believe that it's not just to say governance alone.